My guest is Dr. and Professor Richard Wolff. He is Professor Emeritus of Economics at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, where he taught economics from 1973 to 2008. He is currently a visiting professor in the graduate program in International Affairs at the New School in New York City. His weekly show, Economic Update with Richard D. Wolff, is syndicated on over 70 radio stations nationwide. It's available for broadcast on Free Speech TV. And his latest book is called The Sickness is the System: When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself. Richard Wolff, thank you so much for being with me. It's an honor to talk to you.
Thank you, Marianne. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. I had mentioned to you before we came on that it must be a little bit amusing for you to find yourself this kind of economics professor pop icon at this point in your life. And I remember a time when, not that, it was a pretty elite thing to know who Richard Wolff was and what Richard Wolff was saying. But I think it's a sign of the times and a good sign of the times that so many people are listening to you. It's a good sign because of what you have to say. It's unfortunate in the sense that it bespeaks a lot of despair on the part of so many people. Millions and millions of Americans who recognize that the system is rigged in a way that puts them in a permanent, if not underclass, certainly economic shackles that keep them from being able to actualize their potential, both personally and economically, the way they might wish. And a lot of people are now asking questions, and they're looking to people such as yourself for answers. So where I want to begin is with American capitalism itself. We've been brought up to believe Americans are a capitalist society, and a lot of people are recognizing now that American capitalism, certainly as it is now practiced, is not working for the majority of Americans. My first question to you is, do you believe that capitalism is so inherently flawed that it is not possible for it to be salvaged or transformed in such a way as to provide the basic necessities for the majority of people?
Well, it's a wonderful question. It goes to the heart of the kinds of issues that are on people's mind. I wish I could give you the kind of polished answer that would come if this was honestly faced in our universities and debated and discussed, so that the general graduate of our colleges and universities would be able to engage the importance of the issue you raise. But sadly, that's not the case. And in fact, it's our education system that has plenty of the symptoms of what is my answer to your question, which is, I think, and I haven't thought this until relatively recently, I think that there is at this point not much of a way out for this system, that it has exhausted its growth potential, which was remarkable. I mean, the history of the United States is a history of economic growth that is very impressive, that lasted a long time, that took its own working class with it, at least part of the way. The 20th century was, in a way, the American century. We went from our legacy of being a small colony of a great empire to replacing that empire, the British one, with ourselves, and became kind of reversing the role. Today, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but England is more our colony than vice versa, and that's a remarkable change. And I don't want to shortchange all of that. Along the way, we became a country to which millions of people came for a better life, which they were able to realize here. These are profound achievements, and I don't want in any way to be disrespectful toward them. But like everything, including every good thing, it comes to an end. All economic systems did. We are not unique in that. Slavery, feudalism, ancient village economies, you name it. They grew, they developed, they evolved, and then they passed on. And they were replaced by human beings who grew up in one system and wanted to make a transition to another one, to one that would work better, as you put it, for the majority of the people. And my sense is, and I want to be as straightforward as I know how, That's where we are. We are with a capitalism that has had its heyday. That heyday ended, in my judgment, around the 1970s and 80s. The last 40 years were propped up, as they are to this minute, by a mountain of debt. We could no longer do what we used to do without debt. You know, those ancient times when our parents told us, save your money, put it aside for a rainy day, have a fund you can fall back on. We don't have funds anymore. If you look at the statistics, the level of debt, debt for our homes, debt for our cars, debt for our daily expenses in the credit card, and the most grievous one for me, debt for our students. Instead of celebrating that we have young people wanting to learn and grow, we make it enormously difficult for them, loading them up with debt they cannot ever repay. They can just agonize over on and on. You've spoken about that. Others have. I think we have to face that we are in a state of decline. And that's not a disaster. That's not a tragedy. That is a part of life. And we ought to embrace it. We ought to say, okay, what do we do in that circumstance? Try to make it as comfortable as possible. Try to begin to think seriously about basic changes so that the system that is passing away is replaced by something that will be better for us, so that we don't see it as an end, but as an end of one thing and the beginning of something else. And for me, that is as urgent as anything I see around me. But the signs, if I could just end with this, the signs of the decay, you really have to be covering your eyes not to see them. I mean, we are running deficits we've never seen in the history of this country in peacetime. The government is spending trillions of dollars ahead of its taxes and still not able to give jobs to millions of people, to give adequate housing to our people. I mean, it is an extreme behavior, but not getting the results even that are kind of minimum. Over the last year, just to pick a random one, we were so unable to handle our automobile industry that used cars cost on average 31% more this year than they did last year, which means that even if you look at the child credit that was just passed, that started on the 15th of this month, it is going to be eaten up by the inflation of the people. In other words, it becomes
people
a mirage.
Will never be able to get ahead.
That's right. The president and all the people in Washington, we're going to lick child poverty. We're not at all. And you know, you can't keep promising people it's all going to get better, our best days ahead of us, and keep delivering the opposite, because what you do is you destroy their sense of where they are and who they are, and they become prey to scapegoating. You know, who's to blame for this constant disappointment? And we know, we've seen over the last 5 years the immigrants, the Chinese, the collection, the usual immigrants, minorities, women. I mean, you can collect the people that have been singled out as somehow disturbing, because people are right to be disturbed, but we don't have a culture that allows them to explore what the real reasons are.
Okay, so the signs of decay and decline are obvious to me, and I'm sure to pretty much anybody who is listening to us right now. The distinction to me is between the word end and the word transform. Right. So we had the great progressive era at the end of the 1800s, which was a pushback against the overreach of capitalism. Then we had FDR and the New Deal. FDR said, I'm not destroying capitalism, I am saving capitalism. Then the legacy of the New Deal that lasted through the 1970s. Now, 1980 is when Reagan and Reaganomics took the wrecking ball to any righteous ethical center in the midst of American capitalism. But what you're saying, and this is what I want to investigate further, you don't seem, what are you seeing? Because if I hear you correctly, you don't think that this extraordinary destructiveness of trickle-down economics through a change in tax laws, through universal health care, through cancellation of college loan debt, through free college, you don't believe that this horrible swerve off course can be corrected, which is what I would see as the transformation of our capitalist system. So what are you seeing for what is necessary now? If you say one thing has to end, what do you see it replaced by, or do you think a more radical transformation is possible?
I believe in transformation. My sense is to mix the word end with the word beginning, because that's another way for me to say transformation. So I am in no way opposed to modern technology. I think there are many of the achievements of modern technology I want to hold on to. But I don't want to be blind to the disasters of modern technology. I want us to somehow conserve what is good for the human race and not hold on to what is destructive of the human race. But let me be very precise, if I can, with your question, to answer it this way. For me, there is a solution. There is a way to capture what was good, what was achieved by American capitalism without being dragged down as it declines. And this has to do with me with a celebration of something that is very American, democracy. The notion that if you're affected by a decision, whatever the decision is, you automatically, as a human being, have a right to participate in making the decision. In other words, if the system says you must live with the results of a decision, okay, but then I have to have a say. I don't have to be in charge. I want to share all of that responsibility with everybody else equally, but I don't want to be excluded from these decisions because they affect me. I believe in that. I think the United States will always be recognized as a society that gave that a lot of life, a lot of support, a lot of validity and legitimacy in people's minds. But it always did that verbally and symbolically, but very rarely really. And I'm going to give you for me, the key example. It's the enterprise, the workplace, whether it's an office or a factory or a school or a store, it really doesn't matter. Where people get together to produce something or to provide a service to the community. We call that an enterprise, for lack of a better term. For me, there was something fundamentally amiss in the capitalist way of doing that. And I think while it allowed growth and it allowed productivity, it has come to the end of its ability to do that, and now it's holding us back. And here's what I mean. In each enterprise, a tiny group of people, a tiny minority. If it's the family business, it's whoever the family is. If it's a partnership, it's whoever the partners of it are. If it's a modern corporation, which is what most of the business is now done in that form, it's the board of directors, a group of 10, 20 individuals. They make all the key decisions: what to produce, how to produce, where to produce, and what to do with the net product that everybody has contributed to who works in the enterprise. But when it comes to making these crucial decisions, what do we do with the output? Where do we produce? What do we produce? What technology do we use? The tiny group makes all the decisions, and they're not accountable, not to the workers, who are the vast majority in every enterprise, and not to the surrounding communities, who have to struggle and fight for even a little bit of a say in what is going on here. We see that in the struggle over climate, where corporations have been able to do all kinds of things that the community didn't know about, didn't understand, and now that they do, don't know how to fight it, don't know how to change it, can't get very far, are easily hoodwinked or evaded one way or another. For me, I think we can save capitalism, if you like, although I prefer a different language. Go beyond capitalism. Thank you, capitalism, for what you achieved. You've had your chance. You've done your stuff. You've done a good job in some areas, but it's time to take yourself seriously, that when you endorsed democracy rhetorically, we now have to bring it home and put it right inside your enterprise. And I believe, and I think I can show you, that if we really believe in democracy, if we're going to be honestly willing to do that, I think the decisions our businesses will make will be radically different from what we have seen. And that is, I think, our best hope to get beyond the failures of this system, holding on to its achievements, but saying goodbye to the things that have demonstrated now for quite some time they are obstacles to what we know the people as a whole need.
So my question has to do with distinction between, if there is in your mind, between capitalism and trickle-down economics. Because the paradigm that you just expressed has to do with a change that was significantly promulgated in the 1980s, where the basic only responsibility of the CEO and of the corporation was its fiduciary responsibility to its stockholders, as you said, at the expense of the community, at the expense of the workers, and so forth. Where we were in the 1970s, let's say, maybe we could have gone a different direction. My question to you is, do you see any country, take, let's say, Germany, where a certain number of the workers have to be on the board of directors. Do you see any of the models in European countries that represent the kind of transformation that you're talking about? Because some of them would not see this as I don't think the word necessarily matters, but I think it matters for our purposes, whether that's really the end of capitalism or the transformation. First of all, my first question, do you see any European countries or any countries in the world that are basically demonstrating the kind of change that you would like to see?
I think you see in many European countries, and I study them very closely, partly because my family is French, and I've been speaking French since I've been a child, and so I have relationships over there that make me pay attention. I think what you see there are bits and pieces of steps in the direction. The Europeans, they are an older culture than we are. They've been around a long time. They've been through a lot. I think it gives them a certain, it's hard to put my finger on it, a certain depth in the way they approach these questions. They're willing to take steps. They're not quite as scared about where they'll go.
We're like little kids who won't give up our blankie.
Yeah. They kind of know it's still always open.
Blankie.
Yeah, you make one step, doesn't foreclose all kinds of other options. So let me give you some examples of what they've done. And I know when I explain this to my American audiences, and I was born in the United States, I've lived here all my life, I've worked here all my life. My audiences are still amazed. And it's such common knowledge. So I'll take France because it's what I know best. In France, once you graduate from high school or college and you enter the labor force, the law specifies that your employer, whoever that employer is, must give you 5 weeks of paid vacation every year. You are entitled to that. You are expected to use that time to spend with your family, to recoup yourself. It's something that as a professor I understand, because we have something called sabbaticals. Some of us still do. I used to get those. Every 7th year, the universities where I taught, I was entitled to either a semester or a year off. And the idea was to recharge my batteries, to catch up on the literature, and to be a better teacher because of this time off. I used to think this is wonderful, but I used to wonder, why are only teachers getting it? Other people who have every bit the same need, the same benefit they could get from it. In France, it is the law. In Germany, to use another example, all tuition and all school fees at this point are zero. Not only zero for all Germans, but the Germans welcome anybody. anyone listening to this program, if you're thinking about it, you want to go to Germany, they have a first-rate higher education system, the equal to any in the world, but it doesn't cost anything. Why? Because they have in their mind the sense that an educated person is a blessing to the society in which he or she functions.
Including the economy.
Yes, and of course, the community should support, should welcome, should applaud young people ready, willing, and able to engage a higher education. And I see these as steps. They come out of the particular cultures of each society. They are the ways human beings push towards it. And I don't think it's just over Europe. I think we can see it here in the United States, too. Let me give you an example. We take it for granted in most American cities that if it's a nice afternoon on Saturday or Sunday and we have some friends and we would like to take a blanket and throw it on the grass in some lovely town park and have a picnic and be together with people we love, we can do that. We don't have to ask anyone's permission. There's no fee to pay. We go in. We kind of know that somebody has to cut the grass, otherwise we couldn't be doing this. And someone has to collect the garbage, and someone has to plant those beautiful flowers, and all the rest. We know that's work, that's labor, but we don't want it to be the quid pro quo. I give you $6 so I can get 11 minutes over there on that piece of the grass. We don't want that. We want the freedom. We want the community. It's kind of nice to see the other people 20 yards away under the tree enjoying them. It's part of our pleasure that they're having a good time and laughing, and vice versa. We want that. We make these parks happen. We do that. Just like we did in the 19th century, created public education. We wanted everybody, we kind of understood it, and it would be paid for by everybody, school taxes, all the rest. Why we decided, when it came time for a young person to finish the 12th grade in high school, to enter college, suddenly we don't run it that way anymore. Why not? What happened here? Why are you doing this? And for me, I think if you extend that kind of analytic, you can find lots of steps that different communities have taken that show that want to get beyond it. I think I see it here in the United States now with young people wanting to explore, the open-endedness of the internet. Isn't that sort of for everybody? It's sort of in the air. We all kind of help develop it. We all use it. Maybe It shouldn't be capitalistically constrained. Maybe we shouldn't make everything hostage to profit making. Because, I'm an economist. Profits are earned by a very small number of people. Wages and salaries are what's earned by most people. An economy that wants to serve the majority has to put the wages and salaries first, not profit as the bottom line. You cannot have it both ways. If you teach everybody that profit is the key, you're serving the people who get the profits. You are not serving the people who do the rest.
And that is how capitalism has been weaponized, basically.
Yep.
Adam Smith actually said that you cannot have free market capitalism outside an ethical context. I think a lot of people on both right and left would go, yeah, there's some truth to that we have lost an ethical center, that ethical center can not only be seen within a purview of our private behavior. It has to apply to our collective, and that humanitarian principles such as those you mentioned of people being able to live with dignity, people being able to live with enough time to be with their families, etc., should be more central to our economic functioning. But what is the language exactly? How can we talk about this in a way? People hear capitalism and they hear socialism and they go nuts. How can we have this conversation about the kind of transformation that you mean? First of all, is it really like capitalism ends here and socialism ends there? Or is there not a more subtle gradient? I mean, what would when you were talking about France and when you were talking about Germany, wouldn't they still call themselves societies that have capitalist ventures?
Yes, they would, but here's the big difference. In both France and Germany, huge political parties are socialist, and they have been that way for many, many decades. Americans often, they blanch when I explain that to them. And not only do they have big socialist parties, but those big socialist parties have been in the government, and they're in the government now. I mean, let me give you a simple example. Right now, there's a country that I think all Americans have heard of, Portugal. It's not a large country. It's a small country, right?
Everybody's going there now. I mean, it's like the new hot thing to live in Portugal.
Right. That's right. And you go to Lisbon. It's a beautiful city, and I know
it is. I've been
there. So I say to them, do you know anything about Portugal? And if they've been there, they know that there's beautiful wine and lovely countryside and all of that. And I said, do you know anything about the government? Well, no, Americans don't really pay attention. So I said to them, let me tell you about the government. It was elected back in 2016. It was re-elected last year. Very popular. It's a coalition of 3 political parties. The largest one is the Portuguese Socialist Party. The number 2 is the Portuguese Communist Party. And the number 3 is the Portuguese Green Party. In other words, it's a coalition of socialists, communists, and green. For most Americans growing up in this country, they look at me as if either I'm crazy and have made things up, and I assure you I have not, or else they don't know what to do with a sense. What does this mean? And by the way, those parties have been in governments before. The world doesn't end when you elect a socialist or a communist or a green. It's common practice. There are many parts of Europe, cities where communists are on the mayor or socialists are this or that. Let me put it another way. When a French family is large and it gathers itself together for a picnic or a reunion, Uncle Pierre and Aunt Louise don't speak to each other because one of them is a socialist and one of them is on the right wing, and the family has to navigate the complexities. But you also can't demonize because everybody loves Aunt Louise's cupcakes, and yeah, they don't like her politics, but they sure love her cupcakes, and she's a sweet woman, and she helps others in the family when they're sick. And the complexity of human life, you cannot do the demonization that comes so quickly to the United States, to its people. So for me, I think the way out is to use simple, direct, clear language. Forget all the labels. I mean, if they push you, sure. But mostly talk about, here's how we do it. Here's how we could do it. When, for example, I explain that we got rid of kings years ago, centuries ago. And we said we could govern ourselves by a parliament, which means when we get together to talk, parler in French, parlement, it's where you talk. And we get together, we talk and we argue, we debate and we vote. Is it messy? Yeah. Does it make mistakes? For sure. But we prefer this. We feel part of the community. We feel respected. We don't want to be the subjects of some king far away in an expensive palace we pay for. We don't want that. We applaud that, which I'm glad we do. But the kings never disappeared. They moved inside of our capitalist enterprises.
Well, that's exactly right. We just have a capitalist aristocracy now.
That's right. And we call them CEOs or whatever name we want. We give them a different name, but they are without accountability. They dictate, they control, they buy the politicians, you know that. They buy the lobbyists, you know that. They have, look, they're smart folks. They understand that if they're going to be a minority as wealthy as they are in a society that has universal suffrage, you're in trouble because the majority of people are going to use their suffrage to undo what the economy has done by giving you disproportionate wealth. Sooner or later, with tax laws or whatever, they're going to do that. So the only way to protect your wealth is to make sure that the political system is so organized that impulse from below is squashed, and you demonize everything that looks like it might bring that. I'm amazed where we are in this country right now. This is a capitalism that's on life support from the government. The Federal Reserve is literally lending money to corporations directly, which it never did before. The federal government is running $3 trillion deficits now 2 years in a row. I mean, the economy depends on the government more than ever. And yet you still have the demonization of the government. And I think it's because of the anxiety of the business elite that if the government were really to get involved the way mass of people wanted, then they can't hold on to their special position. And I think they're right. They won't be able to. But it's my job, as I understand it, to explain to people that that's the way out. They won't want it. But no one wants them to disappear. But they have to accept what it means to be in a democracy. They have to work to earn their income, just like the rest of us. There'll be a place for them. There'll be a way to use the skills that they've developed. No, I don't want the violence, and I don't want any of that.
So
I'm worried about how you're going to avoid that, because if we don't do something now when we can, by the time this explodes, it'll be, you and I will be watching the horror rush by us.
Well, I agree with you, and that's why I'm trying to get at what is the language that can be used. So, but let me ask you, capitalism in America, 50s, 60s, 70s, was it on a track in your mind that was survivable and sustainable?
Yes and no. I think what you're saying, and I agree with this part, is, look, we came out of a fantastic depression. People have a kind of forgotten. From 1929 to 1941, that's a long time, 12 years, we were in a depressed economic system. We had in 1933 a peak unemployment rate of 25%, many times worse than what it is right now. Every family was touched by unemployment. We had desperate poverty. We had homelessness, and you name it, only in much greater extent than what we have now. And the government came in a massive way and fixed this situation. And it did so, and this is very important for Americans, it did so because of pressure from below.
Absolutely.
I don't want to take anything away from Franklin Roosevelt. He was a great president. He was the most popular president in American history, reelected 3 times. No president had ever had that before. I don't want to take that away. And he taxed corporations and the rich to create Social Security, to create unemployment compensation, to create a federal jobs program. The government came in and saved the day. He's right. When he said, I'm not here to destroy it, I'm here to save it, I believe he was right. I think he understood what he was doing, and I also agree that is what he was doing. But here's the historic irony. It was the pressure from below. We had the greatest union organizing drive in American history, the CIO. In a matter of years, they organized millions of Americans who had never been in a union before, whose parents had never been in a union. Those people thought they could get through this horrible depression better in a union than not in one, which was the basic argument. Working with them, allied with them, were 2 socialist parties and the Communist Party that were pretty strong in the 1930s. This was an amazing movement of the American working class to the left politically, pushing Mr. Roosevelt, who was a smart politician and understood that they had mass support. So he kind of met them halfway. No revolution, none of that. But I will respond by giving you Social Security, unemployment, all of that. So we came out of the war, 1945, that followed the Great Depression. And here's what happened. For me, this is the core of modern American history. The business community was horrified that they had been taxed. And by the way, let me remind your audience, in the 1940s, while this country was at war, the President of the United States sent a message, State of the Union message to Congress, saying, I want the top income tax bracket to be 100%. If you earn more than $25,000 then, which if you adjust is about $400,000 a year now, no minor amount, but if you earn more than that, the government's going to take it all. It's a maximum income. And when he sent that message, the president of this country, I'm not talking Russia or China or anything like that, said to the Congress, if we're asking young men and women to risk their lives, to lose their lives in a war in Europe and a war in Asia, I cannot allow you to make huge amounts of money while they're dying. I mean, it's impossible. Well, the Republicans got all upset in the way you might imagine. There was lots of yelling in Congress. But when the bill was finally agreed and the president signed it, people don't know this. The top income tax bracket was 94%. Every dollar over 25 that you earned, Uncle Sam got 94 cents. You got to keep 6 cents.
Well, wasn't it still at 90%? I'm sorry.
Yes, it lasted. It lasted
at 90%
90%
under Eisenhower, who was a Republican
That's
president.
right. He kept it. It was in the 70s, in the 1950s, and into the 60s. Only now is it down in the 30s because of a massive change. Yeah, all of that kind of stuff. But we did all those things. But at the end of 1945, this is crucial. The business class, the rich in this country, they were horrified. They weren't just horrified that the left had risen up. They were horrified that a president, one of them, a Roosevelt, came from the same families, had gone along with this, had in fact led it in a certain way.
Well,
and here's what they did, and this is where you and I come in. They went to work, and I've got to take my hat off. They were very successful. They went to work and said, this has got to be undone, this New Deal, all of this stuff. And we have to destroy this coalition of the unions, the socialists, the communists had created this movement. And they demonized first the communists, then the socialists, and the unions have been on a 50-year decline in this country. They were very successful. They defeated the left, they dismembered it, they destroyed it, and it's now slowly and painfully reconstructing itself, which I'm glad about. But I think we have to face, who are on the political left, which is where I am, and I freely say so, we have to understand we're in a rebuilding. I don't know if we'll do it in time, but this country was saved. The capitalism we once had was saved by the left doing what it did. Yeah. Not alone, with Roosevelt and all. When you kill that left, what you did was that the next time capitalism conked, which is what we're living through, there is no left to save it. So it keeps going, almost like a crazed animal that doesn't realize how much trouble it's in and keeps... This last week, Marianne, you and I watched, as did most Americans, an obscene contest in which Jeffrey Bezos and Branson are competing as to who can spend more billions of dollars to shoot a rocket with his friends. You can't keep doing this without expecting, especially in a country like ours, that in the 20th century celebrated its big middle class. You can't eviscerate that and imagine it isn't going to blow your society apart. And Trump and white supremacy and people who don't want to get vaccinated, these are understandable, desperate activities of people who are distraught.
Yeah. Because that much despair, large groups of desperate people, they form a petri dish out of which that kind of collective dysfunction is almost inevitable. They become ideologically vulnerable to capture by genuinely psychotic forces, and that's what has already happened. So that what we're living in right now is almost pre-French Revolution. I couldn't agree with you more. I also think when you're talking about the plans to eviscerate the left, I think the assassinations in the 1960s had something to do with that.
Absolutely.
And then, of course, the apotheosis of all this was the passage of Citizens United. Not just trickle-down economics, but now, and now one of the things that's also part of that, Rick, is how you see the BLM protests, the largest protest movement in American history. At this point, they just ignore protests anyway. It's almost like there is no way for people to express, to use democracy, to express their displeasure so that it's an economic crisis that is coupled with a crisis within our democracy. And you and I agree that this is a very, very dangerous, very, very dangerous brew.
Yeah, I think people forget history. You don't let people
aren't
protest.
taught history. That's part of the problem.
Yeah, it
people
really
aren't
is.
taught history, and people aren't taught what's happening in other countries. Well, one of the things that you talk about in your essays has to do with a change in consciousness. I want to read to you from one of your own essays in Sickness is the System, or System is, yeah, Sickness is the System. You put America's billionaires have gotten nearly $500 billion richer over the course of this unfolding crisis. Jeff Bezos added $34.6 billion in wealth. Mark Zuckerberg added $25 billion. There is no excuse for that. It is unethical, immoral, and unnecessary. It is nothing short of perverse and obscene that the richest man in the United States, Mr. Bezos, should have become much richer while 160,000 people die and millions more are still being infected. You're talking about COVID there. And then the next sentence is, it is a critical time for a shift in social consciousness. And I couldn't agree with you more. It's a shift in consciousness that is going to ultimately create the breakthrough. So if you could just tell me, what is, okay, the shift in consciousness, tell me if I've got this right. So the shift in consciousness begins with the realization that the way American capitalism performs now is inherently detrimental to the good of the vast majority of Americans. Okay, that's number one. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay. That its core pillars have outlived their usefulness.
Yep.
That there are some positive aspects of it that we want to retrieve and take forward.
Yes.
Correct? And
Yes.
now if you could just name to me, what are the pillars of the system that you see replacing what we have now? Because I think the more of us have those in our minds, the more we can start to articulate the political as well as the economic consciousness that is the answer to a sustainable future.
Well, I want the workers to be in the position of running and owning their own enterprise. And I want them to be co-respective with their communities, where what is decided in the enterprise affects the community, where the enterprise is located or where the workers live. Then that community, as a residential democracy, has veto power, and vice versa, where the community does something that affects in other words, I want a co-determination, because we have the beginnings of democracy in the residential communities where we live. We vote for the mayor. We vote for the city council. We kind of have that. I want us also to vote in the workplace. And then the decisions made in either one have to be okayed by the other one. Then we have, at the base of society, the kind of democracy that I care about. And on your question about socialism, I'm a critic of the socialism of the previous century because I think it got sidetracked into this notion that the government is going to be called in and fix everything. Maybe because I'm an American. That's not my idea. I don't want the government to do it. I think there's a role for government, and the government has to solve collective problems. I believe in that. But I want a government controlled from below. Most Americans agree with this. And one of the ways you do that is you give workers the industry. That is working people together who are giving the taxes that keep the system going, either as members of the collective enterprise where they work or as individuals in their residences paying taxes. Okay. But so you've anchored things where the people are.
So a couple of questions, and this one might sound very naive. Who originally invests the money? Where does the money to start this enterprise come from, if not people who feel that they have investment potential?
Well, there's lots of ways of doing this, and here I'm not telling you what might be, I'm telling you what already is, because there are many parts of the world where these kinds of collective or cooperative enterprises already exist. So here are some of the ways they get the money to start up. In fact, let me start with the proposal of the British Labour Party under Corbyn, not now, but while he was in charge. They had an official policy which they said would be their first act if they won an election and they became the next British government. And the Labour Party has been the British government many times over the last century. Anyway, if they got elected, here's what they'd do. They'd pass a law, and here's what it would say. Any enterprise can continue the way it is now, as a capitalist hierarchical enterprise. But if any enterprise wants to either close down or sell itself to another enterprise or leave the country or go public, issue shares and all of that, it must, before it can do any of those things, give its own workers the right of first refusal to buy the company and run it as a worker co-op. And so when this was made clear, the clever journalist said, yeah, but where are the workers going to get the money? At which point, John O'Donnell, who was his shadow chancellor of the Exchequer, smiled at the press and said, we're going to lend it to them. In other words, the government uses, and here's the rationale, the government uses a portion of its taxes to make available at low interest or in some favorable way the money to enable what? To enable a cooperative sector of the economy to be created. And the purpose, he said, I thought was very smart. We want the British people, because we're talking about Britain, we want the British people to know in their neighborhood that side by side with capitalist enterprises, there are these worker co-op enterprises. Mm-hmm. You can shop from one, you can shop from the other. Mm-hmm. You can get a job in one, and then we'll know, and families will talk to each other. I'm in this kind of enterprise, you're in that one. And over time, then, we put it to a vote and let the people decide what kind, that this should be a democratic decision. It should never have been otherwise. And we're going to do this as our way of preparing the ground for an open debate and a decision democratically made, one person, one vote, whether we want an economy that's 50-50, 90-10, or whatever, and that can be periodically reviewed and revisited. Here's another way. Let me give you another example, two other examples. In Germany, which has a bunch of co-ops, you know who supported it? The church. In this case, the Protestant churches. In many parts of Germany, the Protestant churches interpreted the Bible, their religious book, as implying that a cooperative enterprise was somehow more consistent in their interpretation with Christian theory or Christian religion. And so they provided money when people wanted to set these things up. They didn't attack other kinds, but this is what they did. And here's the last example. In 1985, a law was passed in the Italian parliament. It's called the Marcora Law. Marcora was the name of the Italian legislator who pushed it through. And here's what this law does. And by the way, it's still in the books. It was fought by the industry, the capitalists, but they weren't successful. It's still the law in Italy. If you become unemployed, you have two choices. You might call choice number one the kind of American idea. You declare you're unemployed, you prove that you are, and you go what they call on the dole. You get a check every week, sort of the way we do it here. But you have an option B. If you can get at least 9 other Italian unemployed workers to join with you, the government gives you this option. We will give you your full unemployment compensation that you're eligible for every week for a year or however you are. We'll give it to you as a lump sum right now, and we'll do the same for the other 9. On the following condition: you use it as startup capital for a worker co-op. That's one of the reasons Italy has more worker co-ops than most other European countries. If you go to the area around Bologna in the north of Italy, the Emilia-Romagna area it's called, that's an economy where 40% of the enterprise, 40, so just shy of half, or worker co-ops. It's been that way for decades. If anybody wants a laboratory of how a sector like that could work, there it is, and it's very successful.
So let me ask you a question. Do you call yourself a democratic socialist?
You know, like you, I think, I'm so upset by the horrific associations that go with a lot of these words that I shy away.
Yeah.
You know, if you push me, sure, I'm part of socialism. It's a consciousness. It's your point earlier. It's a way of thinking about the world. Even people who would never take the label socialist, when you ask them questions, will give an answer which we in America would say, oh, that's a socialist.
Exactly.
But if you say that to the person, they look at you, no, I'm not a socialist. It's muddy. You got to do a little bit of sorting things out to make them understandable to an American context. 30 years ago, when I would talk, people would look at me as if it weren't safe to stay in my environment too long. You know, it was guilt by association. Now I'm on the radio, on the television, as you said, very nicely you were saying that. It's a different world, and it's
like
not
a
me.
Pop icon. Well, I think
it's not
that's
me. It's this country that has changed.
Well, there's been so much obfuscation. There are so many people who consider themselves conservatives, who consider themselves right-wing, who, if you actually ask them where they are on particular issues, are actually a little bit to the left of center. So these labels do not help. I have two more questions for you, and you've been so generous with your time, and I'm so grateful. First of all, Elizabeth Warren and her proposals about reforming capitalism. Where do you see that?
She represents for me absolutely the illustration of what you were saying. She made a decision, it seems to me, that she's not going to have anything to do with that word socialism. So she repeats periodically, I'm a capitalist, in order to make it possible to continue the conversation with her potential constituents. She wants to talk about a whole lot of things which, just between you and me, are classically things socialists talk about. But by insisting she's not, she's carved out a space in the consciousness to move it along. And, I don't do that, but I respect it.
I do too.
There needs to be a lot of us. There needs to be people like her. There need to be people like me. I'm ready because of my age. I'm ready to say, you want to call me a Marxist? Did I learn from Marx? You bet. And if that's a freaky thing, well, listen to me long enough and maybe you'll discover that it's not me that is scary because of the Marx, but it's Marx that becomes less scary because you understand what I'm saying, and it isn't all that freaky and it isn't all that bizarre, and you don't have to live in that world, that Manichaean world of the good guys over here and the bad guys over there, and all. You don't need that. That's a hindrance to getting us further.
Also, if people actually read Marx, they have a very different view than this idea of Marx. What about India Walton? Do you have any feelings about India Walton running and winning as the mayor of Buffalo as a socialist candidate?
It's terribly important. I couldn't tell you how happy I was to read that. And I don't know her, and I don't even know what her exact I don't follow Buffalo details. So, but it's wonderful. It means that a perfectly typical, let's call it. I mean, I know it's unique in certain ways, but a typical sizable American city, not New York, not California, but not New York City, but in another corner, really part of the Midwest, and traditionally, that the people there weren't turned away by that label, didn't run for cover when her opponents said socialist. They listened to her, they thought about it, and they voted for her. And I think that this is I don't want to be condescending, but there's a kind of maturity developing in the American electorate that I think we should all applaud. These are people
especially
who are
among
not,
the young.
Yes, they're not going to be told, do this, do that, good, bad. They want to see, they want to hear. They're not stupid. They're not falling all over themselves in some faddism. They're looking. They know that this system isn't working for them. And if you're a college kid these days, or you've been to college, you're laboring under levels of debt and constraint that should never be put on anyone, certainly not a young person starting out who is giving himself or herself to the education process. They know it's not working. And they want that's why the polls all show, literally, as you get younger, the number of people critical of capitalism and interested in socialism, keeps going up. And I think that's not a mystery. That's a pretty clear situation.
And of course,
so yes, I'm overjoyed. We'll see what she does, and I'll follow it now. But it's a breakthrough in consciousness. That's the debt I feel to Bernie. I mean, whatever your agreements or disagreement, the man opened it up.
Oh, no disagreements for me. No, absolutely.
And for that, we all are in his debt. He did it when no one thought it was doable, and more. And
I think he even would have been elected in 2016.
Yeah, I think.
So let me ask you
one.
one. Yeah, I agree with that. One last question. Biden has FDR's picture over the mantelpiece in the Oval Office. A lot of talk about the new FDR.
I find it tragic.
Me too.
I see that picture. I've seen it. I've thought about it. It struck me as it obviously has struck you. I'm taken, and I guess I'm a little touched that he wants that.
Yeah,
that he chose that picture. Mm-hmm. That there's something there. Somewhere in
his heart,
senator from corporate Delaware, somewhere he knows.
Yeah.
Maybe it has something to do with his Roman Catholic beliefs. I don't know.
And his age and his having gone through so much.
Yeah, there's something noble that he put the picture there. But I have to temper it because I have to be honest with you. He isn't Roosevelt. He isn't doing anything like, Roosevelt's signature decisions were fundamentally changing this system. To say to the American workers, if you're 65 years of age or older, and you've given a lifetime of working in this community we call America, whether you're a mother at home raising children, whether you're a worker in a factory or someone in an office, you're entitled to a retirement. You're entitled to stop, to take it easy, to not put the stresses of work and so forth. And we're going to create a pension system for you. And we're going to do it, and we're going to do it in a reasonable way, and we're going to help you. And that's going to make you feel better about your future. It's going to enable you not to be a burden on your own children, which is the last thing you want. That's a powerful intervention. So was unemployment insurance. So was the first minimum wage. So was the federal jobs program that created those national parks in the West that we visit with great enjoyment to this day. He did really big. Mr. Biden isn't doing that. He isn't doing that. And Roosevelt had an ally, and Mr. Biden doesn't, but it's partly his own fault. Mr. Roosevelt had the ally of the unions, the socialists, and the communists who were out there every day beating the bushes, leading the little march down the center of town, giving people things to think about that meant when they went into the factory and it came time to vote for the union or not, they voted for the union, not because of the arguments the union made, but because of what Uncle Harry, who was a socialist, said last week at the dinner table when the family got together, or what they saw in the street, or what the school teacher brought to their attention. The Democrats got rid of all those lefties after World War II, and now they are suffering because they don't have an ally. They just don't. They're all out there by themselves. Even the labor movement, which was once a key thing, has been allowed with their complicity to die away. So for me, yeah, Mr. Biden can't be a Roosevelt. It's nice that he has the picture. It's tragic that he doesn't see why the picture isn't enough.
Yeah, well, most Americans don't realize that Social Security came from the Socialist Party.
Absolutely.
And I also think, in terms of what you're saying about the unions, I think it's interesting how, especially among young people, when you look at what's happening at Frito-Lay today, when you look at what's happening at Amazon, unions are sort of hot and happening again now, in terms of a lot of younger people who are rediscovering what all of this means. Well, Professor Richard Wolff, you are, sometimes, all the time, actually, it takes particular voices who articulate things that people can understand. And it is such an important piece. It's such an important part of moving things forward. And your popularity today is, to me, I told you before, I thought it was kind of amusing that you're this pop icon, given the things you talk about, but it's important. It's more than amusing. It's important. And I thank you. And for those of us who have been listening to you really for a long time, it's delightful to see how many people are hearing and how an important part you are of the deeper conversation. And I agree with you, it is a maturing of the American mind, at least among some segments. And I also agree with you that there's tragedy ahead if we don't have these conversations and if we don't create the political will around these changes. I thank you very much for what you're doing for the society, and I'm so honored that you came to talk to me. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome, and let me also, and not just as a return kindness, you brought a whole nother dimension to that presidential race. I said so to you before we went on the air. I meant it. And you've stayed with it afterwards, even though you're not part of that race anymore. Had to recuperate, I'm sure, from it. But you've kept your voice going, and that's what we need. None of us knows which of our voices touch which people in what way. The best thing we need is lots of voices, each in their own way, moving to be able to say, here's what's wrong. Every other breakthrough, whether we overcame slavery or monarchy or all the other things, it took people to say, we can do better than this. We can do better than this. There's no reason to look at capitalism with anything else. We can do better. Let's see how we might do it. Let's listen to the people thinking about it, and then we'll find a way forward, and we won't go down with the system, which would be the ultimate tragedy. So you do that. I feel that you and I are we do it differently, but we're partners in that larger project, and I'm grateful that you're there.
I'm so grateful as well. All my very, very best to you. Thank you very, very much.
You're very welcome.